this is the last Sunday morning in a series that we've entitled Circle Up, where for the past several weeks we've been asking the question, when the me becomes a we, what does it mean for us to root into relationships of significance? And we've had some really helpful conversations, everything having to do with mutual impact and belonging and layers of relationships. And last week I spent time talking about how rooting in often happens through the doing, like the things that we do together. As a matter of fact, the metaphor that we spent some time with was the last few hours of Jesus' life and the things he chose to do, one of which was to have this meal around a table with his disciples. And Scott and I felt like that there's more conversation that could be had around that metaphor and how it relates to us rooting in together this morning. And so here's what I want to do. I want to invite you to use your imagination for just a moment and envision that we're in this room and there's a table in the middle of this room and we're a part of this just amazing meal together. And this meal has great food, there's great ambiance, there's incredible music, the service is off the page. At this meal, we all eat, we're all fed, and we're all filled. Like, it's just spectacular. But really, it's not even about the food and even the service or the environment as much as it is, we're together. And so there's all of this white noise that's just a collision of laughter and tears and joy. Some people are laughing at all the different ways that they've found humor with each other in their lives, like all the silliness that they've experienced together and the joy. And then for some there's like tears because there's this realization of the significance of the people and the relationships that they're holding at this table. And then for some, maybe there's all kinds of excitement or enthusiasm about future meals or the things that they get to do moving ahead in their life together. And so the evening is coming to a close. We've been spending time together for 2 or 3 hours, and there's really only one conversation left to have. There's only one item left to discuss, and that is, how will the meal get paid for? Who picks up the check? This morning, Scott and I want to invite you to take your seat at the table and scoot in just a little bit closer. Occupy it fully. For some of you, this is the first morning you've ever been at Watershed. And so if this is your first morning, just know the meal's on us today, okay? But for others, you've been here for weeks and months, maybe even years. And we want to have an honest, transparent conversation about what it means for us to root in together so that everyone eats, everyone is fed, and it's all so good. Will you do that with us this morning?
So really, it's a conversation about solidarity, right? It's about looking at the room, at the space, and say, there's a sense of ownership. We're all in this together. And so this has never been more true than in the last year and a half as we've pooled all the resources that this community has had and so that we could be in our new home. It took us everything to make that happen. And there were a Tuesday when we have our staff meetings those mornings where we just celebrated the excessive generosity of many of you. As you were writing checks from a place of excess, and then for some from a place of just raw sacrifice. And there was no extra resources to be had, yet you were giving above and beyond in that way. And so with this sense of energy and this sense of enthusiasm, we hit this time last year in full stride. And we basically invited you into 3 trajectories, if you might recall. The first one was stabilization. Continue to be a part of what you're already doing. And we saw some really good growth in terms of just the person who says, I really own what's happening here with my resources. And you gave graciously. And then we invited some of you to do the one-time gift so that we could procure our own home. And then the third sort of journey that we were inviting everybody on was, would some of you or all of you continue just amping it up a little bit more so we can move into our new home really well? And what we found happened is exactly what we asked for. You guys responded. And we were hitting the ground running so intensely. And it was beautiful. It was elegant. It came together so well. And for whatever reason, end of summer last year, things started to kind of flatline a little bit. And not sure exactly why. Maybe because everybody gave so excessively the first part of the year. I mean, we could speculate all day long, but for whatever reason, the giving sort of flatlined, and then as we went into the fall, it started to drop some. And again, we're not exactly sure why that is. We've heard that some of your when you give here at Watershed, you give monthly on your iPhone, on your phone app. You have to renew it every 12 months, and apparently some folks weren't doing that. And many of you told us this past week that you didn't renew it and you didn't know that was to happen, and so you renewed it and you made up for it, and that was really kind of cool. But the point is, we saw some of this happening, and not sure why. So we speculated that going into the first of the year, it would stabilize again. And for whatever reason, it hasn't yet. Now, still relatively soon, the first of the year. But we're about $10,000 behind in the month of January, which, again, if you don't need to be that brilliant to understand that's $120,000 the rest of the year if we don't figure out what this looks like. And so we're looking at all this and realizing this is doable. We can fix this. We can heal this. But part of it is being honest with each other, sitting around the table. And sometimes we laugh and we cry and we have a great time. And other times we just kind of talk honestly about what life is like. I know we do that in my home at our table about the reality of things. And so what I want to do this morning, what Matt and I want to do is, if we can, again, if you're new with us this morning, this is not, we don't do this every Sunday, but sometimes it's really important just to have honest conversations with our Watershed family. And so what I want to do this morning is kind of give you a brief snapshot of who we are in terms of generosity here. We have 344 households in this space, and that might mean one person, or it might mean an entire family. And what we did is we took the last quarter of last year, and we looked at it and said, all right, who's been involved in Greenhouse, or had their kid in middle school or high school, or they went to Preface, or they went to a block, or you gave, that there was some way in which you extended to us this sense that this is my tribe, this is my community, I like what's going on here. I'm in, at least at a subtle level, to a very aggressive level. And so we looked at those numbers. And we said, and we tried to break it down and kind of figure out who's rooted in here and who's kind of still trying to figure out what it means to root in. And so what we did is we looked at some of those numbers, those 344 people, and what we found is that 23% of you, or 78 households, contribute $1 to $75 a month. Does that make sense? Then we found that there was another group of you, about 13%, or 44 households, that did $76 to $150 a month. And again, I know for some of you right now, there's this like, what is going on? This is supposed to be church. I thought this was supposed to be a party here. We're having a good time. We are, and I promise you we're getting to something with this.
It's going somewhere.
So just kind of hang with us on this. Then we found another group, about 6% of you, or 22 households, that are $151 to $250 in your contribution a month. And then we found that there's about a 5% group, 17 households, that are from $251 to $350. Another 5%, about 18 households, that are $351 to $500. And then we had this pretty significant group of you who are $500 or more a month in your giving, 26 households here. And a lot of those 26, many of you live past the 1,000 mark quite significantly. And you take it very seriously. You see yourself sitting at the table and not only providing for your family and your experience here, but clearly you're saying, I want to own this chunk of the group. And then, so that's about 60% of you. And then there's this other part, this other piece. It's the 40%, 139 households who, in terms of generosity, are not involved at all. Don't give. And in one sense, that's a sobering number, it's a sad number, it's a discouraging number. The other side of it, the other side of the coin, is the potential's massive. The reality is some of you literally showed up in October and November, and you're still you're kind of kicking the tires a little bit. You're still trying to figure out what this looks like. I had a conversation with this wonderful person between services, and she said, you know what, I'm ready to jump in. My spouse hasn't come here, but I'm ready to do this. How do I navigate? And we talked through some of those nuances. And so it's really fun to watch how some of you are in this place. We know that some of you in that in that place that aren't giving right now are struggling, and you want to because you realize you're gaining something quite directly here in the space. And so for us, we believe in this space, with that 40%, that the potential is really significant.
And really, this feels like an in-house conversation, but it's really a spiritual conversation. Jesus talked more about money than anything else. And it's because he understood that there was a connection between a person's heart and their resources. I'm not sure why it's that way. I just know that it is. And it's as though Jesus sensed that if you're not careful, you think you own your money, but at some point, if you're not careful, your money starts to own you. It starts to create choices for yourself that you really have no control over. And so in order to try to get ahead of that conversation with his community and start to speak into that spiritual reality, actually in the Sermon on the Mount, he says something really interesting. He says, do not store up for yourself treasures on this earth, where all kinds of things that can destroy your wealth. I think he uses moth and vermin, which is an interesting term. We use vermin so often in this day and age, don't we? Varmints is how we would say it in Kentucky. Don't let varmints destroy it. But instead, and he says instead, store up for yourself treasures in heaven. And in the economy of Jesus, heaven is this reality, it's this environment where God is seemingly at work, where God is doing things that are healing and transformative and redemptive in the world, where his reign and rule is coming more and more into fruition. So that's the economy of heaven. And so he says, store up for yourself treasures in heaven. And he says, for wherever your treasure lies, there your heart lies also. And so part of what I want to do for just a moment, and I want to invite you into a little bit of a contemplative moment, like what's going on in your heart right now. For some of you, and if I could have that circle come back up, please. For some of you, you've already found where you lie in some of these proportions. And for those of you that are maybe on the upper side, where the generosity is really robust, it's possible that you're feeling really excited right now. Your heart is exploding with joy because you know that you're a conduit of resources into a community that is continuing to push the needle in transformative ways, both within itself and beyond itself. For some of you, maybe you live more in the middle tiers, but you had moved the needle a few years ago. And so you're excited about what you're currently doing, but maybe there's still some ambition in your heart because you know you have yet to maximize your potential in this area. And then for some of you, if you live in kind of those lower tiers, it's possible that you might be beating yourself up a little bit. You might be a little sad. Maybe there's some regret. One lady left early and she says, I feel a little guilty. And I said, well, I don't want you to feel guilty. She says, well, no, I do. And that's a legitimate emotion for me, she said. But I wanted to tap in. I wanted you to tap into what you're feeling right now for a couple of reasons. First of all, I want you to know that we can't control the way you feel right now. All we can do is tell you what's going on in the community, how the meal is being proportioned out right now. But then also to say that if you're a person that lives probably in the upper 3 or 4 categories that we just described, it's possible that generosity for you is a lifestyle. I know for my family, every month when we get resources in our household, 1 out of every $10 we pull out and we set that aside and we say, this is what we're giving to our spiritual community. We believe in what this is producing. We believe in how this is changing people's lives and how it's being funneled beyond the 4 walls of this, so much so that we're going to continue to practice. For 23 years, this has been our practice, and we even try to we've even moved the needle a little bit further because there's other things in the world that are just as important, right? So we're constantly trying to move the needle, and here's what I can tell you about the person who practices generosity as a lifestyle. Part of the reason is because they want to participate in the flow of generosity in this world, in this community. Some people describe it as the generous flow of God, others the generous flow of the universe. It's how a person stays healthy and whole in their soul, and it keeps their money from owning them. They have full and total control over the resources, so much so that they can liberate themselves from it and prove to themselves, this doesn't control my life. And so part of the discussion this morning isn't just about this is what's going on with Watershed. It's an invitation to ask yourself a really important question. How connected to your resources are you through your heart? And what will you do about that?
One of the things that Matt and I spent some time, I can't tell you how many hours we spent time wrestling this conversation this morning into the ground. And one of the observations that really surfaced for us was that as an individual, we can make a small splash, but as a group, it's much more significant. So we are just a little over 12 years old, and early on, we said generosity, we wanted that to be not only the culture of how we would invite people to be generous here, but also what we would extend into the city, into the community, and into the world. And we went back and started playing with all these numbers. It became quite interesting. We began asking some questions, and I went to our accountant, and I said, how much have we spent towards all things generosity? Whether it's resources given to Malawi or...
Generosity or justice?
Justice, sorry. So all things justice. So some of our initiatives overseas, our initiatives here local in the school systems, infrastructure towards those initiatives, all these things, and we're bumping into the $450,000 to $500,000 mark, almost $500,000. This community has literally extended out into the world because of the generosity that is just illustrative of this space. So you begin to ask the question in terms of, what can I do as an individual? And what can I do as a community? To me, it's one of the greatest assets that the church offers is what we can do in mass is so much more profound than what we can do often as an individual. What we're learning now, we hung out with Matt and I did, we hung out with some friends on Friday night, and the numbers that we've been playing with is that we've been impacting about 500 kids this year in terms of internationally and locally in terms of just some of our justice stuff. We realize we're off by maybe 200 or 300 on those the numbers. We're actually to the good, about 800 kids right now in terms of the role that we get to play in impacting and exposing kids to education so that their future could literally be different. And that's happening because we are doing this in mass. One of the things that we also said early on is when we procure our own home, when we get to when the mortgage payment is ours and we get to own the real estate space, and we're not at the mercy of some other organization that we rent from. We want this space to be maximized, ideally 7 days a week. And so we are in talks right now with 3 different organizations, and this is a very slow, arduous process, but we are in talks with 3 different organizations, of which one or maybe more than one we hopefully will be in connection with in the next year or so, in terms of those organizations who are doing really good work here in Charlotte, letting them use this space for free to continue to do their great work. So what begins to happen is our mortgage payment becomes a payment, for lack of a better term, towards justice, towards caring for our city. So we are maximizing every cent that comes in these doors. And so you begin to ask the question, well, does it matter that I give in mass? Hugely. We had one time this past summer, we had 50 different small groups that were happening simultaneously in that month. 50 different groups of 10, 15, 20 people gathering, celebrating life together, talking about difficulties and pains, huge wins, massive loss. And
they had their life with God.
That's right. Asking a whole bunch of different questions and coming alive in different ways that literally would not have happened had it not been for some of you saying, or all of us here saying, we're in, we own this at very deep levels. So here's what I want to do. I want to take you on a little bit of a journey, if I may, and I'm going to invite you to open up your Watershed app. If you haven't downloaded it, do so. We'll get to it here in a second. But I need everybody to open up their Watershed app, please. And so what I want to do is I want to contextualize for you what it means in terms of how you see your generosity. So maybe you give $75 a month, maybe you give $150 a month, maybe you give $300 or $400 a month, maybe you give $1,000 plus a month, whatever it might be. And I'm going to throw out some numbers at you here that will help you understand symbolically and quite literally that when you give a chunk of resource, what it's going to. I'm going to break it down into monthly realities for you. So right now we are assuming in our Catapult initiative, both internationally and locally in the schools, we're going to assume that a classroom is 24 kids. And so it takes about $1,800 a year for those 24 kids to experience education, again, locally or internationally, in terms of the role that Watershed has to play. Or that's $150 a month. If you're giving $150 a month to the mission of this community, you can literally have this very real sense of, I am contributing to an entire classroom and providing a transformative experience for those kids throughout the entire year. Or maybe you're saying, you know what, I really value the middle school and high school space. It costs us about $1,500 a year to invest in 2 of our students, or about $125 a month. Again, maybe you're giving $250 a month, and you're saying, wow, I get to be responsible for investing in 4 of our students. Or maybe you've got a kid in Greenhouse, and that child, to invest in that child, it takes $900 a year per child. That's a lot of money at one level. Or $75 a month. But I look back on my Sunday school experience, and it was jacked up. To be here in this space, yeah, sorry. Hopefully the former Sunday school teachers are not listening to me right now on the podcast. But we lived with this space growing up where it was like they were just putting all this weird stuff in your mind. And now here, I really believe this. What we are investing in your children, in my kids, is deeply profound and transformative, and it is setting them up for a complete different experience in terms of the faith journey down the road. All that to say, is it worth $900 a year? Absolutely. Or $75 a month for those of you who take it very seriously, who are saying, I'm in at a monthly level. Maybe you've been through Preface. Preface, Matt talked about earlier, it's a place where discovery happens, and it's a place where mostly it's newer folks that have been around a relative short period of time. And you're together 6 times, there's anywhere from 15 to 30 or 40 of you in that space. It costs us about $220 for every person to go through Preface. The best investment we can make. Because you wake up to stuff that is so rich, that is so deep, that is so unique. For many of you, kind of giving you this sense of, oh yes, that's the language I need for my experience. And it really kickstarts a whole new way of seeing life for you. Or maybe, and this is the last one, and I'm going to let it kind of die from here. Maybe you're saying, well, what's it take to make a block happen in a year? On average, a block costs us about $2,100 to prop up, to train, to develop, to assist, to come around, or $175 a month. And the blocks are these micro communities that are happening throughout the city. And so again, these are where community happens at profound levels. If you might be sitting here saying, all right, boy, I really do want to pull up to the table, because now I am seeing with sort of these bite-sized chunks in terms of the role that I can play. So when you're giving generously, that when you understand that it's all deeply connected, that you understand that what you're doing here is profound. So for many of us, I think it's really easy to say, well, I volunteer. And then for some, it's difficult to say, but I want to give. But giving and volunteering, it's kind of, isn't it the same thing in one sense? And Matt and I began talking about this, and he really had some good thoughts on it. So I'd kind of like to go down that road if we could a little bit, help us understand some of the nuances there.
I think especially if you live in those lower tiers, sometimes, and I'll hear this from various folks, your constitution, your personal constitution says, well, I'm only going to give of my time. And it's usually from the disposition that somehow time and resources are equal commodities. But that's really a myth. I think it's a myth because if it were really true, then the circle that we saw earlier would be way more balanced. I think it's also a myth because for 20 years I've been doing this, and it's wildly easier to retain committed volunteers versus committed givers. And not only that, but like it's irrational to think that if everybody took on that mentality that said, well, I'm only going to give my time, well, we just wouldn't be sustainable. At some point, somebody would have to pick up the phone and call Walter G. Byers School, Shamrock Gardens, Billingsville. They'd have to make a long-distance call to, if you even do that anymore. I just dated myself completely. Yeah. Skype, to Guatemala and Malawi and go, yeah, I know, like, what you need from us is crucial, but we just don't have it anymore. And so there's a real rational conversation that exists here that says that if we're going to really own our seat at the table well, then it can't be a this or that. It can't be I'm either going to give or I'm going to give him my time or I'm going to give him my resources. It has to be both. It has to be instead of a this or that, it's a this and that. And really, to only live with one or the other is you're eliminating half of your experience here, right? Like you're only scooting up to the table maybe with 1 foot or using one arm. And it's just not ideal for anyone. It's certainly not ideal for us for all the reasons we've just mentioned, but it's not even ideal for you. I mean, you're exempting yourself from the generous flow of the kingdom. Like God's inhaling and exhaling of generosity, or for some of you, it's the generosity of the universe, right? I watched someone actually have an epiphany around this time last year. It's just one of the best stories. We were walking, a lot of you, through the building at that time that we thought we were going to be purchasing. And there was this young single mom, and she'd been coming to Watershed for a couple of years and was just really kind of struggling to get by in a lot of ways in her life. And we got to the end of the tour, and she got really emotional. She started crying. And we're like, whoa, what's going on here? And she said, I've watched how this community has cared for me and loved me. God has changed me through what happens here. It's impacting my child. And I want so much to be a part of it with my resources, but I've just never been able to put myself out there. And I want to do something now that we're moving into this building. All I have over the next several months is my tax return. And you can have it all, $2,000. And so
that's huge as a single mom. That was huge.
It was massive. Yeah. It was massive for her. And I know her personal story, so I know how that's large for me. Who am I kidding? But what happened from there is what's really interesting. So that was last year when she lived in that lower tier of $0 or $1 to $75. And over the last several months, the last 6 months, she's actually in the top 22% of givers here at Watershed. And the reason is because she was having honest conversations in her heart. She started embracing generosity as a lifestyle. And she said, I refuse to let my experience with God or my experience in life or my experience with this community to be only halfway realized. I want it to be more holistic. And so this morning, what we're inviting you into is the full experience at the meal. It's not just showing up, but it's actually being a part of it with all of yourself. And here's what we would ask of you right now. In this circle, I know some of you, this is like, all right, and I had this conversation with someone else, like, all right, this morning was an activation conversation for me. This ignited something in me, and so I know that I'm going to start doing something moving forward. And so maybe that's what this is for you. For others of you, the gift of work for you, like you have this brilliance in the way that you do life that generates ridiculous amounts of resources. And so, like for some of you, it's like, all right, this little incremental click. And for some of you, it's, oh my gosh, I am so far below my potential right now, and it's time to get rolling. If we had, let's see, so $120,000 will level us out by the end of the year. We were crunching some numbers the other day. If we had 135 households that said, I'm going to increase my giving by $75, then that levels us out by the end of the year, which is a wonderful thing.
But that only levels us out.
That
what about
only levels
future
us
stuff
out.
And ideas down the road?
It continues to have bump us up into this ceiling. And so at bare bones minimum, like we have to figure that part out. And so for some of you, like maybe that's the starting point. You're just, all right, I'm going to start with $75. But for others of you, what if you started to try to envision yourself clicking into some of these deeper, more robust expressions of generosity like we just described? The amount of mission and purpose that we could begin to realize here that we're going to have to at some level. Do you understand the significance of those decisions? And so would you pull open your app, and we would like to invite you to respond this morning. On the app, if you click on the Circle Up panel of your app, And then there's a link that you click on. There's a online response form. And at the top it says 2018 12-month giving commitment. Will you begin by making a 12-month commitment here for generosity to be a lifestyle and for the way that you see your spot at the table to move from this or that to this and that? Would you be willing to do that? And then the next portion of the app says, what were you giving last year? And this is just a starting point. We're not trying to out you on anything. We're trying to help you name where you are now. And then the next line is, where are you going? How much are you going to increase? And so last year, if it was 200, that goes in the first answer blank or whatever, the first question. If last year generosity just wasn't a part of your life, that's fine. But go ahead and put 0 there, all right? Let us know how you're moving the needle. So the first section is where you've been. The next section is how much you're going to increase. And then the final section has something to do with how much altogether. So you would add the first.
Monthly, right?
Monthly. What can we depend on as a community every month so that we have some sort of predictability? And so not just are we level at the end of the year, but like we've got white space to dream towards things that are really significant. We started this conversation this morning saying, all right, everybody scoot in, right? And so we're still scooted in at the table. And will you join people like me and Scott and a host of others who see this through the both and? Like, will you join that single mom? Good night. That is just incredible. That story is absolutely jaw-dropping. In my house, when we pray over meals, it's at the beginning of the meal. I think that's rooted in some tradition that there was always a fear the food was toxic or something.
Poisonous, yeah.
Poisonous. So I don't even know if that tradition is relevant anymore in that regard. But I want to pray at the end of the meal today. And let's bask in what God is doing. Let us pray that what your heart is doing right now, there's an inner authority that you can begin to live with in terms of how you see your seat at the table. Won't you pray for us, Scott?
Let's pray. Before I pray, what I want to do is I also want to extend to you guys, if you have any questions about anything we just talked about, you want to process it, you want to verbally engage it, what do you mean about those numbers? You want to see a budget, whatever. We are completely vulnerable here in that sense. And so please, at any point, feel free to reach out to me after the service or email me, whatever. So let's pray. God, we are excited and challenged and compelled to realize that what we get to do together, the mark that we get to have as a tribe together is so much more profound than who we are as individuals. That we're being called and challenged to see what we have and what we own as not ours, to be able to release it in scandalous ways, to live a life that is fundamentally that way. God, I know it's so hard. It's so difficult to work so hard for something and then to have this sense of not feeling like I want to hoard it or keep it back and keep things safe and protected. And I get that. I understand that. And part of it is literally just having to give it away so that I can disassociate the obsession that sometimes our resources create. And so, God, we do this out of a sense of love for each other, love for you. Grateful that we can even sit here and have this narrative. Grateful for a group of very courageous people who, for some in this space, this is not even a necessary conversation. It's just part of their regimen, their diet, and they're maybe rooting us on because they're charging us to say there's others that need to live lives like we are. And then there's others in this space, God. I hope they're not mad or angry or frustrated or sad or even shamed. My hope is that there's this sense of, all right, I want to move forward. I want this ping that is in my soul to compel me to do something different. And may you recognize that, Watershed brother or sister, as that maybe that is Spirit speaking to you, inviting you to see your life as something that is open-handed in giving away. We are grateful for a day like this, grateful for honesty, that we can be just in the same space together. So God, we love you, and I'm grateful for this group. Amen.